Hello everybody, and welcome to this talk on emotional health, delivered to you by your local Samaritans branches for you, the University of Gloucestershire. My name is Ellie, with me is Andy, and we're going to talk today about being as healthy as possible emotionally. But first up, I'm going to just talk for a few minutes about the Samaritans. You may already know a little bit about the Samaritans. You may know that we listen to people who are having a difficult time in their life. People can get distressed and they can feel sometimes overwhelmed with unhappiness. They may be struggling to cope with life. They may even be thinking about suicide. And it can help enormously to talk to a sympathetic person away from family and friends, to somebody who will just listen to them. And that's what Samaritans is for. Samaritans helps people who are going through a difficult time by listening to them and helping them to explore their feelings. We're probably best known for answering phone calls, but there are several ways that you can contact us, and we'll give you some more details about that at the end of the talk. We've been in existence for over 65 years. There are more than 20,000 of us volunteers, including Andy and myself, and we're there for anyone, whoever they are, whatever they're going through, day or night, 365 days a year. And your local branches are Cheltenham and Gloucester, which is where Andy and I are from. So enough about us. What are we going to talk to you about today? Let's have a quick look. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So today we are going to talk about what is emotional health, the signs of being overwhelmed, ways to cope with stress, ways to cope with being overwhelmed, how and why talking can help, and a little bit about listening to other people. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And first up is going to be Andy. So Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, so I'm Andy from the Cheltenham branch of the Samaritans, and I'm going to talk to you a little about emotional health. What's important to start with is emotional health isn't the same as being happy all the time. We all have a range of emotions, and they may be being happy or excited, or being sad, tearful, or down. Emotional health is about a sense of well-being and our ability to cope with those different emotions. So that's lots of emotions, and that's normal. It's also normal to have different emotions at different times and at different times of our life. Emotional health is about our ability to cope with these emotions, and that can also be different at different times in our life. It's really important that we look after ourselves and each other when we're not feeling so good. So if we get to the point where we're struggling to bounce back from some of those negative feelings, it can help to reach out and talk to someone we trust about how we're feeling. And we'll talk a bit about that later on in this session. But first, Ellie's going to talk a little bit around emotional health and how we might deal with those feelings.
Thanks, Andy. So part of our emotional health is about dealing with stress. Excuse me, there we go. Part of our emotional health is about dealing with stress. Everybody experiences stress. Feeling stressed is normal, and everyone has their own stress bucket, if you will, that can fill up with different things. These stresses are going to be different for each of us, and they might include things going on at home, perhaps relationships with friends or with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, social media worries, body image, peer pressure, exam stress, or anything else that bothers us. And right now, I expect a lot of us have spent the last couple of years feeling very stressed about the pandemic and all the different things that has brought with it. So when someone is not coping and their stress bucket is overflowing with all the things that are bothering them, they have a really horrible feeling of being overwhelmed by it all. So how can we stop our own personal stress bucket from overflowing? Well, we can use different coping strategies to help us prevent our stress bucket from filling up. And you can see on the picture there that coping strategies almost take the pressure off a little bit. They operate a little bit like a tap on our stress bucket, and they just help some of it go away enough that we can manage and that our stress bucket doesn't overflow. Coping strategies are techniques that help reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed by the things around you over which you have no control. They help us to open the tap on our emotional bucket to prevent build-up and overflow. So we're going to talk about some of the signs that you might see if somebody is struggling to cope. And then Andy will go on to talk about what some of those coping strategies might be. Most of the time, people may not look very different when they're feeling overwhelmed, even if they're carrying a huge emotional burden. Some people are better than others at hiding it if they're feeling unhappy, but ignoring the problem and bottling it up is never a good idea. So let's have a look at some of the different signs that you might see if someone is struggling to cope. You may have felt some of these yourself. Some of these are easier to see than others. Different people may show that they're struggling to cope in different ways. So wanting to cry all the time, mood swings, a change in mood, that might be a sign that someone is struggling to cope. Finding it hard to concentrate and not being able to focus on things, especially things that used to bring enjoyment. Struggling to cope with everyday things and tasks. Changes in social media, perhaps posting depressive statements or starting to follow and like things on social media linked to suffering, self-harm, or even suicide. Seeming tired all the time, not having that get up and go, and feeling like you haven't got any energy at all. Not wanting to do things that perhaps somebody used to really enjoy. That can be a sign that someone's struggling to cope. Experiencing brain fog, finding it hard to think clearly or to concentrate. Or perhaps seeming restless and agitated and anxious. Maybe using alcohol or drugs to cope with feelings. Or seeming burnt out and exhausted all the time. Perhaps not looking after one's appearance and not wanting to talk to or be with other people, perhaps becoming withdrawn and isolated, spending a lot of time in their room. So those are all different signs that somebody may not be coping, that they may be feeling overwhelmed with the things in their life that are bothering them. And remember, as we've said, being emotionally healthy is not the same as being happy all the time. Everyone does feel bad at times. But on the other hand, if it feels like everything is going wrong, university, family, friends, health, relationships, and so on, if it feels like everything's going wrong, it's really important to try and recognize that weird sensation of beginning to feel overwhelmed by it all. And if that happens, it's important to ask for help. And the good news is that there's lots of ways of getting better at coping. And some of them you can do yourself, and some of them you need others involved as well. And Andy is now going to talk a little bit about coping strategies.
Thanks, Ellie. So yeah, the good news is there are things that we can do to improve our emotional health. And the first stage, as Ellie said, is recognizing when there are things that are making us feel overwhelmed. So what are some of those things? Well, often when we're feeling down, we can sometimes not do some of those things to look after ourselves that we know can help. Things like eating healthily or doing exercise. For some people, the endorphins that we get from exercise can really help with our mental health. There's other things here about staying connected with other people and doing things that we enjoy doing. Again, when we're feeling down, we may not feel like doing those things, but they can also help our emotional health and try and help us be resilient when we're struggling to cope. The one I really want to focus on is the one in the centre, to talk to someone you trust. It's really important when we are feeling overwhelmed that we recognise that reaching out to somebody can help us, and that might be a friend or a family member or even somebody you don't know. But the key is to talk to someone. We believe at the Samaritans that by talking to someone, it gives us a chance to sort through our feelings, to get things into perspective, and maybe to help us to start thinking about how we move forward. We all know what it's like when something is going round and round in our head and we're struggling to think about anything else. And talking to somebody can help us not feel quite so alone and ready to go out there into the world a little bit stronger and a bit more able to deal with what's going on. So who could we talk to? Well, at the University of Gloucestershire, there are services such as the University Student Services, help zones, the chaplaincy, Nightline, the counselling service. But there are also organisations like the Samaritans, as Ellie said at the beginning, where they're 24/7 on the end of a phone to listen to people who might be going through a tough time. With the Samaritans, we are there. It's a confidential service, and that can help to talk to somebody you don't know. But the key is what I said earlier, is to talk to someone you trust and to help you offload some of those feelings that you're having. I think with that, I'm back to Ellie.
Lovely, thanks, Andy. So I'm going just to talk for a few minutes about listening. As Andy said, talking to somebody that you trust when you're feeling overwhelmed can be a really brilliant way of just giving yourself a bit of a vent, a bit of an outlet, a bit of a safe space to start working through what's going on for you. And you can be that person for somebody else by listening to them. But when we say listening in this context, to listen well, to really be there for the other person and to really listen to what they say, and to try not to interrupt them with our own thoughts and feelings, that is a kind of listening that we don't always see in day-to-day life. And we're going to talk a little bit about that now. It's worth saying that you don't have to be a Samaritan to listen well, but sometimes you might have experienced this. We go to a friend, somebody that we trust, because we're upset about something and we're hoping to talk. And without meaning to, perhaps they might take over, try to reassure us when really we just want to be heard, start telling us that it doesn't matter, that we're being silly, or yeah, that happened to me too, and start telling us their story. And all of those things can stop us from talking, can stop them from listening, can stop us from being heard. So when you're trying to listen to somebody else, when somebody else is coming to you with something that they need to talk about, the most important thing that we can do for someone who's struggling to cope is to give them time and patience and to really listen to what they have to say. If a friend seems to be having problems and you feel like you want to help them by listening, then try asking open questions to encourage them to open up and explore what's going on. An open question is a question that doesn't have a yes or a no answer. That would be a closed question. An open question is something like, how are things going for you? How long has it felt like this? When did it start? Those sorts of things that allow the other person to open up and really explore what's going on for them. I'm sure you can think of lots more. And don't be put off by a negative response or a quick, I'm fine, it's okay. They may need time to pluck up the courage to speak about whatever is troubling them. So be brave, take that time, and really give them a chance to speak up. If they do start to talk and open up, sometimes repeating the odd word back to them so that they know that you've heard and understood them can help. So something like, if they say they're talking about how bad things are at home, you could just reflect that back by saying, things are really bad at home, hey? Just something like that, just reflecting back a bit of what you've heard to make them hear that you've understood them and that you're listening. Or just acknowledging their feelings, saying something like, that must be really difficult for you, or that sounds exhausting, can stop them thinking that perhaps that they're being silly, that their concerns don't matter, or that what they're worried about isn't real. And sometimes simply saying, go on, tell me more, can encourage somebody to keep talking and to open up. So to listen well to someone, to show them that we care about them, we need to have patience, as it may take time and a few attempts before they're ready to open up. Try not to criticize or to blame. Try not to become distracted while they're talking. Put your phone down. That's tip number one. Because otherwise they may feel that what they're trying to talk to you about isn't important to you and that you're not really there. So use open questions, if we've said. Just asking somebody, how are you doing, really, can make a big difference to how they're feeling. It means somebody has noticed that something's not quite right and they won't feel so alone. Don't feel you have to fill the silence. Just be brave and give them time and just listen. Okay, I'm going to pass you back to Andy now for a quick summary of everything that we've talked about today.
Thanks, Ellie. So what have we covered? Well, we've talked about emotional health and our well-being and why that is so important. Remember, emotional health isn't about being happy all the time. It's about our ability to cope with emotions. And there will always be ups and downs in our emotions in life, and how we react to those is normal. But we can do things to improve our emotional health. The key, though, is to recognise when we're struggling to cope, when we're feeling overwhelmed. And in those situations, talking about our feelings can really help. The most important thing is to talk to someone you trust, and that might be a family or friend, one of the university services I talked to before, or somebody you don't know, such as the Samaritans. Key thing is to have courage, to ask for help, to talk about how things are going for you, and to allow somebody to listen to your feelings. And remember, the Samaritans are always there, so no one is ever completely alone without help. And you'll see our contact details on the screen there. So thank you. Have a great university experience, but take care of yourself, and hopefully some of these tips have been useful.